What comes to mind when you think of Carthage? A fierce rival of Rome on the brink of victory, only to be crushed and erased from history. That's the usual story, but it barely scratches the surface. In this video, we'll travel through 8 centuries of Carthaginian history, tracing its rise from a small colony to a Mediterranean powerhouse and, ultimately, to its downfall. But before Carthage even existed, let's rewind 400 years. In the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, Egypt's once mighty influence had faded, and the Phoenician city-states along the Levantine coast, Sidon, Byblo, Cirata, Tripoli, and most notably, Ty had secured their independence. The Phoenicians were master traders and seafarers, their ships crisscrossing the Mediterranean, connecting distant lands through commerce. To support their vast trade network, they established over 300 colonies across North Africa, Cyprus, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. While these colonies enjoyed significant autonomy, they still recognized the authority of their founding cities and paid an annual tribute. The name Phoenicians comes from the Greek word for purple cloth, their most famous export. Later, the Romans adapted this name into Punic, which is why their wars with Carthage became known as the Punic Wars. According to legend, in 814 BC, Princess Dido, sister of the king of Ty, fled the wealthy Phoenician city with a small group of followers. They settled near other Phoenician colonies in North Africa, and without much hesitation named their new home Carthage, literally New City. While Dido's story is more likely myth than history, archaeology confirms that Carthage was indeed founded in the late 9th century BC. At first, it was just a modest trading post with no more than 1,000 inhabitants. The fledgling city paid tribute to both Ty and the neighboring Libyan tribes, but its location was a stroke of fortune. Perched at the narrowest point of the Tunisian Strait, a natural gateway between the eastern and western Mediterranean, as trade flourished, Carthage grew into a bustling hub where ships from across the known world stopped to exchange goods, ideas, and ambitions. After Dido's death, Carthage transitioned into an aristocratic republic. Power rested in the hands of the Asherat, a council composed of representatives from the 10 most prominent families. Major decisions such as declaring war were put to a vote in the popular assembly. Despite paying tribute to both Tyre and the neighboring Libyan tribes, Carthage thrived. Its wealth, fueled by maritime trade. As its influence spread across the region, the city grew bolder. By 650 BC, it was strong enough to establish its first colony, Ebusus, in the Balearic Islands. Today, we know it as Aita. In 586 BC, after a relentless 13-year siege, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Ty, the heart of the Phoenician world. Around the same time, under the command of General Malchus, Carthage crushed the Libyans in battle, permanently freeing itself from tribute. With its independence secured, Carthage stepped into a new role as the guardian of the Phoenician colonies. It stood as a shield against both barbarian incursions and the rising tide of Greek expansion in the west. In the mid-6th century BC, Carthage became a monarchy with Magobert as its king. To counter the growing Greek presence in the western Mediterranean, he forged an alliance with the Etruscans against the Greek settlers, colonizing Corsica. In 539 BC, the combined Carthaginian and Etruscan fleets clashed with the Greeks at the Battle of Alea, off the Corsican coast. Though the Greeks claimed victory, their losses were so devastating that they were forced to abandon their colony. Corsica fell under Etruscan control, while Sardinia became part of Carthage's expanding domain. By the end of Megawatran's reign, nearly all Phoenician colonies in the western Mediterranean had come under Carthaginian rule. Most willingly, though some, like Gates, modern Cadiz, had to be subdued by force. When discussing Carthage's control over its colonies, it's important to clarify that, apart from those in its immediate vicinity, the city did not rule them directly. Instead, these colonies enjoyed significant autonomy while remaining bound to Carthage through strategic alliances. Under these agreements, they were required to pay a tribute of 10% of their total revenue, adopt Carthage's diplomatic stance, which was treating its enemies as their own and its allies as their friends, and supply troops for the Carthaginian military when called upon. In 510 BC, Dorius, brother of the famed Spartan king Leonidas, attempted to establish a colony in North Africa. Carthage wasted no time allying with the Libyans. It swiftly crushed the Spartans and expelled them from the continent. The following year, Rome overthrew its Etruscan rulers and became a republic. That same year, Rome and Carthage signed a treaty of friendship. Under its terms, Carthage pledged not to attack Rome or its allies, while Roman trade and military ships were barred from venturing beyond the Italian coastline unless absolutely necessary. Carthage's swift and decisive actions, both in repelling the Spartans and in securing diplomatic ties with Rome, showed just how dominant it had already become in the Western Mediterranean. By this point, it was not just a trading power, but a force that would aggressively defend its interests. By the early 5th century BC, Sicily was a land divided, its western half controlled by Carthaginian Phoenician colonies, while the east was dominated by Greek city-states, with Syracuse at the forefront. In 480 BC, Carthage launched its first major attempt to conquer the island. Punic forces landed on Sicilian shores, but the campaign ended in disaster. At the Battle of Hima, the Carthaginians suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of a united Greek army. Witnessing the collapse of his forces, King Hamilcar chose to take his own life rather than face capture. The crushing defeat at Himera and the death of Carthage's king brought sweeping political change. The monarchy was abolished, and in its place, a republic was established. Instead of a single ruler, 2 Sapphites were elected annually as the city's highest officials. They proposed laws and policies to the Senate, a council of 300 of Carthage's wealthiest and most influential citizens. All decisions required unanimous approval. If the Senate failed to reach an agreement, the matter was passed to the popular assembly for a final vote. Despite the disaster at Himera, Carthage managed to hold on to all of its Sicilian territories. However, the defeat forced the city to avoid direct conflict with the Greeks for the next 70 years. Yet, Carthage did not remain passive. During this time, it steadily expanded its wealth and influence, strengthening its grip on North Africa, Spain, and the Mediterranean islands, laying the foundation for future dominance. During this era, the Carthaginians embarked on a series of extraordinary voyages. Magan Barkid crossed the Sahara, forging an overland trade route with Egypt. Hanno the Navigator ventured along the West African coast, reaching as far as Mount Cameroon and exploring the Canary Islands along the way. His brother Himilo sailed around Spain, navigated the shores of Gaul, and made his way to the British Isles. Some evidence even suggests that Carthaginian sailors may have reached the distant Azores in the Atlantic. In the 18th century, a hoard of coins resembling Carthaginian currency was discovered on the islands. However, it remains unclear whether these coins date back to antiquity or were brought there much later, possibly after the Portuguese colonized the Azores in the 15th century. The Carthaginians revolutionized shipbuilding with their most remarkable innovation, being the ability to mass-produce ships at unprecedented speed. They developed a system in which each vessel was broken down into standardized components, each marked with special symbols. This allowed shipbuilders to assemble an entire ship from prefabricated parts in just a few hours. In Greece and Rome, a team of skilled carpenters would spend days or even weeks crafting a ship from scratch. In contrast, Carthaginian shipyards, through meticulous organization and efficiency, could launch multiple ships per day. Moreover, the standardization of parts made repairs faster and easier, granting Carthage a decisive advantage in both trade and naval warfare. Like their Phoenician ancestors, the Carthaginians were a deeply religious people, convinced that their fortunes, both triumphs and failures, were dictated by the will of the gods. To them, Carthage's fate was merely a thread in a grand divine design. Their pantheon was rooted in Phoenician tradition, but over time it evolved under the influence of neighboring civilizations, reflecting the city's vast cultural connections. Carthage's supreme deity was Baal-Haman, the god of fertility, power, and fire. He was often depicted holding a scepter, the mark of a ruler with a sacred bull standing beside him, an enduring symbol of strength and prosperity. His consort, Tanit, was the city's principal goddess and divine protector. More than a mother figure, she embodied war, death, and rebirth. Her distinctive symbol, a triangle crowned with a crescent and a disk, adorned temples, amulets, and even military standards, a constant reminder of her presence in both daily life and battle. The Carthaginians honored many gods, including Melkart, the guardian of sailors, Eshmun, the god of healing, and Rashev, the god of war. Yet it was the worship of Baal-Haman and Tanit that left the most enduring mark on history. Unfortunately, their cult also became one of the most controversial aspects of Carthaginian religion. Ancient Greek and Roman writers accused the Carthaginians of practicing human sacrifice, particularly in the worship of Balaam and Tanit. According to these accounts, the victims were often infants and young children. Some of the most chilling descriptions speak of times of war or crisis when Carthaginians would offer their firstborns as sacrifices, burning them within bronze statues of their gods. For centuries, these claims were dismissed as exaggerations or Roman propaganda. However, modern archaeological discoveries suggest otherwise. Excavations have uncovered a Tophet, a vast sanctuary filled with urns containing the ashes of children, and animals as well as stone stele bearing inscriptions referencing sacrificial rites. While scholars continue to debate the scale of these practices, most now agree that human sacrifice was indeed part of Carthaginian religious life. Over time, these rituals gradually disappeared. Human sacrifices were replaced with offerings of animals, rams, bulls, and birds. Later, even these gave way to symbolic offerings of grain, oil, wine, and butter. This shift did not signal a decline in Carthaginian devotion. Rather, their religious practices evolved in step with their society. In 409 BC, Carthage renewed its campaign for dominance over Sicily, igniting nearly 130 years of relentless warfare with the Greeks. The struggle swung back and forth, with both sides claiming victories and suffering defeats. At one point, the Greeks even besieged Carthage itself, but by the 3rd century BC, they had been driven back, clinging to a narrow strip of land on Sicily's eastern coast. In 289 BC, Agathocles, the king of Syracuse, died, leaving Sicily vulnerable to Carthaginian expansion. Seeking protection, the island's Greek cities turned to Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, who was already waging war against the Romans in southern Italy. Never one to pass up an opportunity for glory, Pyrrhus eagerly accepted. In a swift and decisive campaign, he nearly expelled the Carthaginians from Sicily entirely. With victory within reach, he began assembling a fleet to carry his army to Africa, aiming to strike at the heart of Carthage itself. But those ambitions never materialized. The Greeks of Sicily, chafing under his increasingly autocratic rule, began to rebel, and small uprisings flared across the island. Sensing that his position was becoming untenable, Pyrrhus took the first convenient excuse to withdraw, returning to Italy, where he soon met defeat at the hands of the Romans. With his western ambitions in ruins, he abandoned the campaign and returned home for good. After the death of Agathocles, a band of mercenaries he had once employed remained in Sicily. Seizing the city of Messana, they established their own rogue kingdom. Their rule quickly drew the ire of Hiram II of Syracuse, who marched against them with his army. Desperate, the mercenaries sent pleas for aid to both Carthage and Rome. The Carthaginians were the first to respond. and by the time a Roman force arrived, a Carthaginian garrison was already stationed in Messana. Seeing an opportunity, the Roman consulus Claudius devised a ruthless ploy. He lured the Carthaginian admiral Hanno into a supposed negotiation, only to capture and torture him, forcing him to order the Carthaginian troops to abandon the city. Though they obeyed, the Carthaginians saw Hanno's surrender as an unforgivable betrayal. He was crucified as a traitor, and in retaliation, Carthage declared war on Rome. Thus began the First Punic War. At the start of the war, most of the fighting took place on Sicily. Rome's army, fresh from unifying Italy, proved dominant on land. But at sea, it was no match for Carthage's powerful navy. 4 years into the war, the Romans caught a stroke of luck when a Carthaginian warship ran ground. They dismantled it piece by piece, and by analyzing the markings on its components, uncovered the secrets of Carthaginian shipbuilding. In record time, Rome constructed an impressive fleet, but building warships was one thing. Fighting with them was another. At the time, naval combat revolved around ramming tactics. Ships maneuvered to strike the enemy with their reinforced prows while exchanging volleys of projectiles. But the Romans, with little seafaring experience, struggled against the highly skilled Carthaginian sailors, whose Phoenician heritage had made them masters of the sea. Rather than trying to outmaneuver their foes, the Romans redefined naval warfare on their own terms. They transformed sea battles into land battles by inventing the corvus, a retractable boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to storm enemy ships and fight in brutal hand-to-hand combat, where they held the clear advantage. By the 10th year of the war, Rome had taken the fight to Africa, crushing the Carthaginian army in a series of decisive battles. Sensing Carthage's weakness, the Libyans rose in rebellion, further straining the city's resources. Carthage, however, held a ruthless tradition. Defeated generals were executed, and as a result, by the time of the Roman invasion, there were hardly any experienced commanders left to lead its forces. In desperation, the Carthaginians turned to Xanthippus, a seasoned Spartan general. In a matter of months, he reorganized the army, restored its fighting strength, and drove the Romans out of Africa. With neither side able to land a decisive blow, the war dragged on, becoming a brutal war of attrition. By 241 BC, Carthage had no choice but to surrender, not because it was militarily defeated, but because it had simply run out of the resources needed to continue the fight. However, the peace terms were surprisingly lenient. Carthage lost its holdings in Sicily and was forced to pay reparations to Rome. But it remained an independent power. Yet true peace was still out of reach. The war had drained the city's treasury, leaving it unable to pay its mercenaries. With no wages in sight, the mercenaries revolted, and the Libyans quickly joined them. The rebel army seized several cities and laid siege to Carthage itself. Desperate, Hamlar Barca was forced to raise an army from the town's own citizens, something that hadn't been done in centuries. Meanwhile, the unrest spread beyond Africa. Mercenaries stationed in Corsica and Sardinia, also left unpaid, launched their own rebellion. After crushing the uprising on the mainland, Hamlar began preparing an expedition to reclaim the islands. But before he could act, Rome stepped in, seizing both Corsica and Sardinia. Unable to challenge Rome, Carthage had no choice but to surrender the territories, seething with resentment. The brutal conflict had been known as the Mercenary War, or the War of Inexpiable Hatred, a name earned by the sheer cruelty displayed on both sides. Even by ancient standards, the atrocities committed were unprecedented. Though often overshadowed by the First Punic War, this rebellion inflicted far greater devastation on Carthage, nearly breaking the city apart. After crushing the mercenary revolt, Hamilcar turned his sights on Spain, dramatically expanding Carthage's holdings on the Iberian Peninsula. Under Carthaginian control, The region's rich silver mines became a vital source of wealth. The influx of silver, combined with profits from maritime trade, allowed Carthage to rapidly rebuild its military and economic power. Following Hemlar's death, command of the army passed first to his son-in-law as Drupal, and later to his son Hannibal. Hannibal not only extended Carthaginian rule in Spain, but also began searching for a justification to renew hostilities with Rome. That opportunity came with the conflict over Segum. According to Carthage's treaty with Rome, its influence in Spain was restricted to the area south of the Ebro River. Saguntum, though located within this zone, was a Roman ally. Seeing an opportunity, Hannibal besieged, captured, and plundered the city, leaving Rome with no choice but to declare war. Thus began the Second Punic War. While the Romans were assembling an expeditionary force for the invasion of Africa, Hannibal took a bold and unexpected course. Gathering his army in New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, Spain, he led his troops overland into Italy, executing his legendary crossing of the Alps. Hannibal hoped that the recently subjugated peoples of Italy, Etruscans, Sarrites, Umbrians, Oscans, and others would rise up against Rome, just as the Libyans had rebelled against Carthage when the Romans landed in Africa. However, this mass uprising never materialized. Only the Celtic tribes of Cisalpine Gaul joined his cause. With his Gallic allies, Hannibal commanded an army of roughly 40,000 warriors. Once in Italy, he delivered a series of crushing defeats to the Romans, the most infamous being the Battle of Cannae, where his forces encircled and annihilated an entire Roman army in one of the most devastating defeats in Rome. Is history. Yet, despite this triumph, Hannibal's strategy faltered. While some cities in southern Italy defected to his side, the vast majority of Rome's allies remained loyal, ensuring that the war would drag on and that his ultimate victory was far from assured. After the Battle of Cannae, the Romans shifted their strategy, avoiding large-scale battles with Hannibal's main forces and opening a second front in Spain. After a series of hard-fought battles, they struck a decisive blow by capturing New Carthage, modern Cartagena, severely weakening Carthage's influence on the Iberian Peninsula. In 207 BC, Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, marched from Spain with a 30,000-strong army to reinforce him in Italy. However, the Romans intercepted him at the Metaurus River and, using their superior numbers and strategy, annihilated his forces. Hasdrubal was killed in battle, dashing any hope of reinforcements for Hannibal. With Spain firmly under Roman control, Publius Cornelius Scipio launched an invasion of Africa. The decisive moment came when the Numidians, Carthage's former allies, defected to Rome, shifting the balance of power. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend Carthage, but in 202 BC at the Battle of Zama, his army suffered a devastating defeat. The terms of peace were crushing. Carthage lost all of its overseas territories, saw its holdings in Africa drastically reduced, and was forced to pay a staggering war indemnity to Rome. To ensure it would never threaten Rome again, Carthage was stripped of its once mighty navy and forbidden from waging war without Rome's explicit approval, and only within Africa. Once a dominant power in the Mediterranean, Carthage had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, a semi-puppet state under Rome's watchful eye. Yet even in its weakened state, it continued to unsettle the Romans. In 150 BC, Senator Marcus Porcius Cato visited Carthage as part of a Roman delegation, and was stunned by how quickly the city was recovering its economic strength. From that moment on, he ended every speech in the Senate with the now famous refrain, "Furthermore, I believe that Carthage must be destroyed." When Carthage attempted to defend itself against Numidian raids on its borders, Rome seized the moment, using it as a pretext for war. Soon after, 80,000 Roman soldiers landed in Africa, setting the stage for Carthage's final and most desperate struggle. After a grueling 3-year siege, Carthage fell. Its people were enslaved, and the city was utterly destroyed. A century later, Julius Caesar would rebuild Carthage, but it would be a different city entirely. The original Carthage was wiped from the map in 146 BC, a date with a striking historical irony. In 146 AD, Septimius Caius was born, a descendant of the Carthaginians who would one day rule as Emperor of Rome. As emperor, Caius honored Hannibal, Rome's greatest adversary. And under his reign, temples to Baal, Tanit, and other Carthaginian gods rose in the heart of Rome, standing proudly on the Roman Forum. The Punic people, the descendants of Carthage, lived on in North Africa for centuries until they were gradually absorbed into the Arab conquests of the 7th century. The Roman Carthage that replaced the original endured for over 1,000 years until the 13th century, when it was finally destroyed during the wars between the Arabs and the Crusaders. And so ended the story of one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations in history. We put out new episodes every single week. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Heat. Heat.